You think you lack discipline, but what if that's not the truth? What if the real enemy has never been your willpower, but your brain's wiring itself? This is the question that has haunted warriors, monks, and modern minds for generations. Why do we fail to change, even when the desire is burning? Why do resolutions collapse, habits shatter, and motivation vanish the moment life becomes heavy? You feel this tension every day, the gap between who you are and who you know you should become. Today, I will show you why. And more importantly, how to break it. Because hidden beneath your struggles is a system, ancient in spirit, modern in neuroscience, capable of rewiring your habits, your focus, and your identity through movements so small they escape the brain's resistance. I call it the Neural Kaizen Protocol, a disciplined path where tiny steps carve monumental change. In my 68 years wandering between laboratories and mountaintop dojos, I have watched this system turn chaotic minds into unshakable ones, not through force, not through motivation, but through micro-actions that silently reshape the neural circuitry of discipline itself. If you want to master your mind, sharpen your focus, and rebuild your life from the smallest possible steps, stay with me. And if you seek more teachings like this, wisdom forged where Zen meets neuroscience, then like this video and subscribe so you never walk this path alone. Now let us begin the descent into your brain's hidden architecture, where tiny steps become transformation. The brain does not fear failure, it fears change. Deep within the neural architecture lies an ancient guardian, the amygdala, trained over thousands of years to recoil at anything sudden, overwhelming, or uncertain. When you attempt a massive transformation, you don't ignite discipline, you trigger a biological alarm. Cortisol rises, breath shortens, the mind becomes fogged, defensive, ready to retreat. This is why your biggest goals often collapse before they even begin. Your brain interprets ambition as danger, but the Neural Kaizen Protocol bypasses this defense system. When a step is small, so small the mind almost laughs at it, the amygdala stays silent, no alarm, no resistance. The brain allows the action to slip through its gates unnoticed. And in that quiet permission, something extraordinary happens. Microdopamine begins to flow. These are not the explosive spikes of novelty or reward. They are precise, minimal pulses, the brain's way of whispering, "Good, continue." Neuroscientists call this the reward prediction mechanism, the circuitry that strengthens when progress is detected, even if the progress is microscopic. This is why 1-minute habits work, why one push-up leads to 10, why reading one sentence awakens curiosity for a chapter. Imagine a swordsman training in the dawn light. He does not swing wildly. He repeats a single clean cut again and again until the movement melts into the nervous system. Each repetition sends identical patterns through the neural pathways, gradually engraving them with quiet precision. Axons thicken, myelin wraps more tightly. The motion transitions from conscious effort to unconscious command. This is the neurobiology of small steps, a biological partnership between fear and focus, repetition and reward. Change does not begin with power. It begins with gentleness that the brain accepts. Neural transformation is not an explosion. It is erosion, steady, patient, carving identity one repetition at a time. This is the hidden engine behind the Neural Kaizen Protocol. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reshape itself through the smallest, most consistent signals. People imagine change as a moment of lightning, a breakthrough, a revelation that splits their life into before and after. But inside the brain, change looks nothing like that. It is quiet, methodical, relentless. When you repeat a tiny action, 2 neurons fire together often enough, and they begin to wire together. This is Hebbian learning, the fundamental law of rewiring. But I see it the way an old swordsman sees the arc of his blade, not as science, but as the gradual refinement of motion until it becomes pure instinct. With every micro-action, you send the same neural pattern through the same pathway. A faint trail appears, then a groove, then a road. Finally, a neural highway your brain chooses automatically. Repetition thickens myelin, the insulating sheath around your neural circuits. More myelin means faster signals, smoother execution, less friction. Your brain becomes an efficient machine not through force, but through gentle, repeated precision. Over time, the action that once felt clumsy becomes effortless, even automatic. And as the repetition continues, something deeper shifts. The basal ganglia, the command center of habit, begins to take over. What started as conscious effort sinks into the realm of identity. You no longer try to be disciplined. You are disciplined, not because of intensity, but because your neural pathways have been carved toward discipline itself. In my neural visions, these changes appear like landscapes transforming beneath the surface. Wild terrain becoming ordered, chaotic lines becoming structure, instinct replacing resistance. Every tiny step is a sculptor's cut on the stone of the self. Your smallest actions are not small. They are the architecture of who you are becoming. In the old mountain dojos, the samurai did not chase greatness. They chased precision, one cut, one breath, one stance repeated until the body no longer asked permission from the mind. This is the samurai principle of microdiscipline, and it aligns perfectly with the neural laws that govern your transformation. The Neural Kaizen Protocol draws its power from this ancient rhythm. Your brain is not moved by intensity, it is stabilized by ritual. Micro-rituals, small, repeatable actions performed with consistency, signal safety to the nervous system. When you perform one deliberate breath, one prepared stance, 1 minute of focused work, you send a message to the prefrontal cortex and basal ganglia simultaneously. We are returning to the path. For the samurai, the ritual mattered more than the strike. For your brain, the repetition matters more than the scale. Neuroscience calls this synaptic stabilization, the process where circuits are strengthened not by force, but by return. When you show up in small ways every day, the brain begins to anchor these actions, lowering internal resistance and increasing neural efficiency. Consistency becomes a kind of internal gravity, pulling you toward the behavior automatically. I remember an old master who instructed his students to bow before every strike. Many thought it symbolic. It was not. That single bow was a neurological reset, a brief activation of regulated breathing, a reduction in autonomic arousal, a sharpening of attention. The ritual calmed the limbic system, reduced cortisol, and prepared the motor cortex to learn with precision. This is the secret. Small discipline is not weakness, it is strategy. It is the calibration of the nervous system before the act. When you engage in these micro-disciplines, you forge the identity of a warrior who returns, quietly, steadily, unshaken by chaos or inconsistency. Kaizen does not demand perfection, it demands presence. And presence, repeated, becomes power. Resistance is not a flaw in your character, it is a feature of your biology. Inside your mind, the default mode network acts like an ancient fortress, built to conserve energy, protect identity, and maintain the familiar. Whenever you attempt a dramatic leap, this fortress awakens. It floods you with doubt, distraction, hesitation, and the seductive pull of old habits. Not because you are weak, but because the brain equates sudden change with danger. This is why motivation fades, why discipline collapses, why big goals feel impossible. But the Neural Kaizen Protocol does not challenge the fortress head-on. It slips inside, unnoticed. A tiny step, so small it feels almost meaningless, does not trigger the brain's defenses. The DMN does not raise alarms over reading one sentence, cleaning one corner, taking one mindful breath. No cortisol spike, no panic, no internal rebellion. The system allows the action to pass because it demands almost nothing. And in that small acceptance, momentum is born. Most people wait for motivation. But neuroscience reveals the opposite truth. Action creates motivation, not the other way around. A micro step produces a micro dopamine pulse, just enough to tilt the mind forward. That pulse becomes the spark for the next step, then the next. The brain learns not through intention, but through motion. Picture an ancient city under siege. The gates are reinforced, guarded, unbreakable. A battering ram fails, but a thin blade slipped quietly between the stones weakens the wall from within. Day by day, the structure loosens. Then, without violence, the entire fortress yields. This is how Kaizen dismantles resistance, procrastination, perfectionism, self-doubt. These are fortified neural patterns built over years. You do not defeat them with force. You bypass them with subtlety. One tiny action, then another, until the old circuitry crumbles under the weight of consistent, gentle progress. Change doesn't begin with strength. It begins with a step small enough for the brain to accept. To turn Kaizen from a strategy into architecture, you must understand how the brain, the body, and the environment fuse into a single system. A habit is not just something you do, it is something your neural circuits learn to expect, then prefer, then identify with. The Neural Kaizen Protocol builds this architecture one microscopic brick at a time. In learning, Kaizen becomes the ignition spark. One paragraph, one highlighted line, one solved problem. These small tasks activate the prefrontal cortex without overwhelming it, preserving willpower instead of draining it. Because each micro-session ends in completion, not burnout, the brain releases a clean dopamine pulse that labels the action as rewarding. Over time, the mind associates learning with low friction and high reward. Curiosity becomes easier than avoidance. In physical mastery, Kaizen works like neural conditioning. One stretch, one controlled breath, one precise movement. These signals wake the motor cortex and recalibrate proprioception without triggering the body's stress response system. The basal ganglia, the home of habit, takes note. This action is safe. Repeat it. The result? Small, sustainable effort becomes more transformative than any single burst of intensity. In discipline and career, Kaizen becomes identity reinforcement. Writing one sentence, reviewing one idea, organizing one small detail. Each micro-action whispers to the brain's self-model, I am someone who returns to the work. Identity is not built from declarations. It is carved from patterns. You act, the brain updates, and action becomes character. Even your environment participates. Move one object, remove one distraction, add one cue. Each tiny shift reduces cognitive load and shapes your neural pathways toward clarity. The brain prefers the path of least resistance, and Kaizen slowly engineers that path. Through these applications, the Neural Kaizen Protocol becomes more than a method. It becomes infrastructure, embedded in the cortex, stabilized in the basal ganglia, supported by the autonomic rhythms of your breath and posture. Your behaviors stop being battles. They become the natural route your brain has been trained to follow. Small steps don't just create change. They create the neural world in which change becomes effortless. A warrior's life does not end with a final battle. It ends with a final refinement. Even in old age, when the hands tremble and the breath shortens, the disciplined warrior still wakes before dawn to polish his blade. Not because an enemy approaches, not because glory awaits, but because refinement has become his nature. And this is the same truth your brain reveals under the lens of neuroscience. Transformation is not a moment. It is a rhythm. The Neural Kaizen Protocol is not a technique you try. It is a path you become. The cortex continues rewiring until your final day. Synapses keep strengthening. Myelin keeps thickening. Identity keeps shifting with every tiny action you choose to repeat. Your brain is not a statue carved once. It is a river that reshapes its banks with every small movement you make. When you understand this, the pressure to change quickly dissolves. You realize that greatness is not built in leaps. It is built in grains, fine, patient, accumulating. A 1-minute meditation becomes emotional stability. A single daily sentence becomes a finished book. One mindful breath becomes a calmer life. Small steps stop being tools. They become who you are. In my travels through monasteries, laboratories, and the deep chambers of human behavior, I have seen this truth more clearly than any other. Those who change slowly change permanently. Those who honor the micro-step become the kind of mind that cannot fall backward, because their very circuitry has shifted toward forward motion. This is the path of infinite refinement, where discipline is not a struggle, but a breath, not a battle, but a presence, not a performance, but a pattern. And every pattern begins with one tiny step repeated until the brain embraces it as destiny. Walk this path with patience, walk it with precision, and your mind will reshape itself into something unshakable.